Ladies and gentlemen, and we are back with another episode of Crime Story. Without any further ado, let's hop straight into this review. We begin the episode once again with another brief recap of what's previously been happening in the Crime Story series so far. But then we quickly get back to where we left off in the previous episode, with Frank Herman and his accomplice breaking into a rich mansion owned by a couple where they begin a robbery. Robbery to steal these coins. Now, it's a very brief scene, but it ends with a brutal way with the old couple. One guy's badly beaten, but his wife is killed. And this is due to the accomplice being, erratic, out of control, and it's really brutal. Despite the shadowy scenes, kind of trying to hide it, it's still pretty brutal, as, this just is something that went too far. Now, from my history with the mob, true, they were home invasions, but, for the most part, mobsters usually preferred, or I should more say up-and-comers, usually prefer to be less violent. It's good to have a violent reputation, it adds to your allure, but there is a line you don't cross, and this definitely would have crossed a lot with mobsters, and obviously this would play definitely a role in the remainder of the episode. After the opening credits, like we normally do, we then see the strike force along with their chief just playing poker. This scene can kind of be viewed as out of nowhere, but for me, I just like how we just get to see what they are up to during their downtime. Something we see a lot in cop shows now. Like what are they doing, outside of work. It shows them not only human, but also develops us as the audience to see the bond that these guys have. It's just nice. They're just, hanging out, playing chips at Torello's apartment. And I do like a little transition shot as we see the poker chips and it transitions or fades into these gold coins, where we see Frank, Paulie, and the new guy divvying up the score. Divvying up the score. Paulie is, of course, angry at what Frank's accomplice did because he went too far and killed this woman. Obviously, to the gangland code, this is just beyond irredeemable in their eyes. And just as, the accomplice is about to, stand up and threaten Paulie then gets his gun and threatens to basically shoot him. But Frank talks him down, takes the gun away, and tells Paulie just, to go. Get this stuff, fence it off quick, because once it gets word out what they've done, heat's gonna be on them and their crew. Paulie leaves. Frank then turns and goes and gives a little bit of a slight lashing to his accomplice, saying, what he did was wrong. But the accomplice just basically says, hey, it was either him or me. The accomplice basically tries to justify his action, saying it was either him or me, and if the woman just did as she was told, nothing would have happened. Already developing a little bit of a distrust, and basically slightly foreshadowing kind of his own fate with what's really about to happen to him. The next scene is then Torello and his second in command at the place where this robbery is taken down. This is the Novak's place, and they are questioning the husband. Well, not questioning, we're more just going through what happened that night. We can see that he's badly bruised, and you can clearly tell he was shooken up of what happened, especially with the loss of his wife. Torello is obviously, showing compassion to what's happening to him, and basically, asks him to, questions like, as everybody asking around the house, could you go through, write down some, things you've had, repaired and all that, so, and it's best that you do it, because it might jog your memory and help, and he agrees to. We also are introduced to his, legal assistant, well, I'm sure secretary assistant, by the name of Miss Inga Thorson, Inga Thorsman, we'll call her Miss Thorson. Torello then, of course, goes and questions her and asks if what relationship he has with Mr. Novak, and she just says, just professional, nothing of that nature. The conversation then stops when he gets a call from his wife telling him about the good news about a possible baby, and of course he is thrilled. Now, despite him being married and faithful, you can tell there's a little bit of a little bit of an attraction here. I think it's mostly from her to him because because he's faithful. He's not the type of guy to cheat, and for me, this kind of shows really great with his. Obviously, the character has a way of having many female admirers, but also shows that what kind of person he is, very faithful to his wife. We then go back to the Force's main headquarters, where one of Torello's guys come in and basically saying how he's been around, Frank Holman, and basically because of this, how he's been acting after this, home invasion took place, and the fact that he has a record of home invasion. They then realize that Frank Holman must have been responsible with him and his accomplice. And they put a plan into action to get Frank Holman and basically have him be flipped. This, as a result, would get Ray Luca. It doesn't take 2 and 2 for them to figure that out. The next scene, the next thing that happens in this is they end up trailing Frank Holman. And I like the scene of, just them following around in these, early 60s style cars. The music has that sort of rockabilly style, which was kind of really dying out really in the 60s and early 60s. And of course they end up stopping him, interrogating him, and Frank Holman ends up getting him $200. Obviously, Torello's trying to have him become a confidential, informant or try to flip into his side, but Frank Holman's not going to go along with it because Frank Holman's clearly the type of guy that wouldn't rat. We then go back to the Strike Force headquarters yet again, and this try to do another tack. Try to get Mr. Bartoli to help them. And by targeting his, that casino truck that we established in the previous episode that he has, using that to help, flip in order to, have Ray Luca also have Frank Holman, get rid of the accomplice type thing. And with the 200 that Torello got, he put that in a jar that was meant to that goes to a police family, specifically the detective that got shot by Ray Luca in basically the pilot. We then go back to Torello back at his apartment, hanging out with his wife Julie, having a nice time, only for a phone call to come with Miss Thorman on the phone, calling him to come over about the Novak incident. And Julie's a little bit jealous because he hears this woman on the phone, but Torello is of course faithful and would never cheat on his wife. And he goes. We then cut to the casino truck, where the Strike Force goes in, busts up the joint, where Bartoli just happens to be there. As a result, they then bust up the game, and we find out through a dialogue that they ended up burning all his money. He then goes to and of course this would lead to basically, let's say, Frank Holman's situation. The next scene is Torello with Miss Ike Thorman, and the two just basically talk. He clearly doesn't want to be there because he wants to be with his wife, especially with the good news, and she is just basically talking about how this incident is affecting her with Miss Novak, and she tried to talk with her boyfriend but lashed out. As a result, I really like this because it shows the two essentially getting along, but at the same time, opening up, and it really shows a bit of a vulnerable character. People might view this as out left field, but for serialized drama type things, this feels right at home with the series really trying to be more of this type of story and series. So I really don't mind it. It actually makes her a very far-landed and compelling character, in my view. The next scene then follows is Bartoli heading to Ray Luca's joint. Joint, I should say, but home. Bartoli rips into Ray Luca, courtesy of the crap game that went down, clearly showing that he cares more about money than anything else. Unlike most mobsters, even though they do care about money, the traditional old skies always valued loyalty and respect and honor above everything else. Anyway, he's angry at the position Ray Luca's put him in and tells him he needs to get rid of this accomplice that was in this Novak murder once and for all. Because first off, like he says, it should never have happened in the first place, clearly showing he does have a code of honor, but also the old school mentality. Civilians are off limits. The young punks that come up were ambitious and had good ideals, but they weren't very well groomed for that kind of thing. And this, of course, puts Ray in a very uneasy position because he needs to basically sort this out if he can move on with his plans to rise up further in the criminal ranks, and especially since he's establishing a wide bookmaking network. But of course, he's being spied on by two of Torello's guys who have watched the whole thing. We then go back to the old social club, where basically Holman, Paulie, and the accomplice are all there. It's also here we reveal that the accomplice name is Vince. Finally, took him a while. Maybe they might have mentioned it in the previous episode, but right now they finally mention it. But Vince finally gets his cut, and we see how he doesn't really quite gel with, I wouldn't say the crew, but kind of how organized crime mobster type works. He's more of a street thug. An independent operator with really no charm and no sophistication, and clearly this is going to cause a problem with his relationship in the crew. Eventually, of course, he's getting his cut, and then he leaves, showing, cut, and he kind of leaves. The next scene is basically Torello and Julie are having breakfast, having a nice family life, and then his second in command comes in and tells, how everything went down, with Bartoli, how they saw what happened at Ray Luca's joint. It's clear that, that Mike Torello's plans are proceeding, and, and especially with Torello and his wife, trying to move forward in their relationship. We then go back to the social club. Ray Luca is here, and he tells Frank to get rid of Vince. He's bringing too much heat. Frank doesn't want to get rid of him in a brutal way because the two go way back. He wouldn't even, as he says, roll over for a guy, for a loaf of bread. He's, loyal now. But Ray Luca says he's got bigger things, planning, and this could jeopardize that and the whole crew. So obviously Frank is put in an uncomfortable situation, but he knows he has to protect the crew and obviously himself. We see, of course, a foreshadowing of Ray Luca's large bookmaking racket, a bookmaking network, and clearly showing this is a very smart street punk, and he has a lot of aspirations. Frank, of course, does, as I said, follow Ray Luca's orders, and he, calls Vince, and they plan for another robbery. We then see Torello and Julie at a place to get a coffee table, and of course they're having problems because of strike, the guy being fringy, won't give their deposit back. Torello's getting angry, and Julie, he doesn't really like it. And obviously he doesn't, like this kind of attitude that Torello has, and shows off, and it slightly affects their relationship. This will kind of be one of the many factors that result in why these two don't last together. Anyway, he eventually drops her off, and Torello ends up going to a bar to see Mr. Novak and see how he's drowning himself in booze. Obviously, this has affected Torello a lot, seeing what's happening to the guy and feeling really sorry for him. And he just can't, get this out of his head. He then goes back to the strike force place. After, finally getting calmed down to go home, he then goes back to his place, and he's still remembering the events of the first episode where he could have shot Ray Luca here and there. Talk more with these guys, and then, of course, they find out, with Frank and Vincent planning another score, the two, and, of course, plan a kind of a sting operation to get them. As we then cut to Paulie, Vince, and Frank rob a place, they tell, Vince to go, outside. Frank then goes to the phone and basically drops a dime on Vince. This then results in basically a car chase as Vince is being chased by Torello and his guys. He eventually gets out of the car, which crashes, and results a rush on foot, where they go to those old-fashioned bridges. Those bridges where they would, like a boat's come and they would flip, go up? They essentially run to the midway just as it's going up, resulting in Vince and Torello hanging on, or more accurately, Torello hanging on and Vince hanging on to him, only for Vince to Mike Torello couldn't hold on, and Vince falls to his death. The last scene ends with, Vince, finally managing to make his way down, but find out Vince is dead. In many ways, it's both cathartic, yeah, as Vince got what he deserved, and eventually Miss Novak's murder being avenged with the killer dead. But this affects Torello because, well, they couldn't get him to kind of help get Ray Luca, or at least get Frank to Rat, so Rat and Flip. Ultimately, this, if you think about it, started the kind of thing that would be prevalent a lot during the show, where Torello, just as they would finally nearly get close, or a plan to get away to get to Ray, something would happen not getting him, and this would be a continualized serial format that will continue on later on in the series, and that's where we end this episode. Once again, most of the Strike Force doesn't really play that much larger role, except for Torello, as we see more of his personal life story, take a bit of a role in the story, and obviously show his trying to keep this marriage life, but there's always something about this cop life that keeps interfering and kind of affects it in the long run. Abrams is absent from this episode. Surprisingly, he was introduced quite a lot, but never really came back. Would not really come, not play much of a role in these early episodes, but, he would eventually become more prevalent and a mainstay. We see Ray Luca doesn't really play that much of a role in this episode, except foreshadowing his big plan, and really poorly does play as showing the kind of distrust they have for the new guy, and it would affect them the most down the line. Really, Steve Goldman is again absent here, become more of a player. We see a bit of Julie with, the relationship with him and with her and Torello getting a bit strained. And Bartoli, still great as ever. And again, not much with his character. Surprisingly, the character that gets more of a role here is Frank Holman. Obviously feeling divided with, feeling loyalty to Vince because the two go back to the joint. There's a trust and a bond there. The two, knew each other, liked each other, friends. But unlike Vince, Frank adapted quick to the world of the mob lifestyle. You take orders, there are rules, you follow them. This ain't the joint. Things are different on the street. And, and this kind of makes his character, I think, more complex because he's clearly a mobster that has rules, guidelines, things you don't cross. So I kind of like they got the opportunity to address that and continue that. The real, I guess, you could really say the true villain of these of this episode is the character of Vincent, Frank's cellmate. He is portrayed by actor. Our actor's name is Michael Kimberly, and even though they say Vincent, it's actually Dusty Noonan. I like how they portray him. This guy who's clearly unhinged, not really adapting to the new style way of criminality. I really kind of like that, and of course his downfall was always meant to go down with him not really understanding much of how the criminal world, the criminal world that he's now a part of works. Miss Thornton is portrayed by actress Patricia Carboni, probably butchering her name, and I really like how they introduce her. I'm pretty sure this character might be making more appearances. I'm not entirely sure. I believe so. And, I really do like the actress here, as they try to have her develop a bit of a thing for Torello, obviously to develop more drama with his relationship life. So I can't wait to see where we go from there. Shadow Dancer. I actually really like this episode. I feel it's an improvement compared to our previous one. And for me, I like how they established with, Torello, trying to get Ray Luca, with the events, both, Ray and Torello, both in the events of what's currently happening. I feel that's actually better for story-wise, even though Ray doesn't play that much of a role in the episode. And I also really do like it for, getting, I think, on track on where the series should be. Torello constantly chasing Ray Luca, and cases just so happens to just coincide with, his case just happens to coincide with getting Ray Luca. So I really do think it's a step up and improvement compared to the previous one. And there we have it. That was Shadow Dance. Join us next time in the next episode in Crime Story. But until then, this has been the Stephen Hour. Ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.